Labor trafficking is when somebody is lured or exploited from country of origin into Canada and they're sold a dream, a promise of work, a promise to take care of their family in country of origin, and they're promised safe housing, fair pay, and often options for immigration permanency.
What the type of things happen in rural areas? You get into more labor trafficking, and then there's sex trafficking mixed in with that.
Victims of labor trafficking are new to Canada, which comes with a whole set of vulnerabilities in the sense that sometimes they do not speak the language here, they have a lack of support, they have a lack of connection to their new community. The vulnerabilities that typically bring them here include extreme poverty and oftentimes leaving corrupt countries. In regards to the risk factors, it's unsafe living conditions and unsafe working conditions, as well as long hours and poor treatment that put them at a particularly high risk.
Well, there is always a risk factor on that situation, and that happened mostly in Latin American countries. Everybody have this dream to go to United States or Canada, and there is some uh, people who what they do, they promise to have a job to migrant workers and promise the papers and everything. And most of the times, there is a real organization, there is real companies who do that, there is governments who doing that. But if you see of these workers see an ad on Facebook or internet, most likely it's not the right people, and there is a lot of situation that they promise something and they just take the money away, or they promise they're gonna come here legally, and that is not true. They are coming here not legally, and they do this exploitation here in Canada, and it's the same like I don't know if you hear of the Berry case a few years ago. That was 43 people in one house, and they were coming here with the promise of having a legal job and legal documents to Canada, and that wasn't true. So we saw those type of situations. It's not too often, but we can see these situations happen.
Typically, those who are labor trafficked are also sold that dream of citizenship and a stable status here in Canada. Oftentimes, recruiters go to the country of origin where there's extreme poverty, and they are talking to these individuals, and they are letting them know that there is work in Canada and that they're going to be very profitable, that they are going to have very great living conditions, and that they're going to be able to support their family back in their country of origin. When that happens, they are sold this dream that, they're going to be able to escape this poverty, they're going to be able to put food on the table and a better life for their families.
So labor trafficking always starts in another country and the person is brought to Canada. So some of the warning signs are poverty. The poverty we know here in Windsor is nothing like poverty in other countries like Mexico, Guatemala, the Philippines, Indonesia, where there's no food banks, there's no Ontario Works. There is, if you can't work and feed your family, then you go hungry. Then you lose your housing, you have no schooling. And so oftentimes, though, that poverty is one of the main factors. So it's a friend, an uncle who says, hey, do you want to work in Canada? I can help you get there. You will make enough money to take care of yourself in Canada, to feed your family and change their life. So they're selling of that dream. In the international community, Canada is known as a good place to live. We are safe here. We're not afraid of the police. We're not afraid of the military. We have employment standards, and the international community knows that. So it feels like a safe decision to come to Canada and work.
With individuals who are labor trafficked, they are oftentimes having their documents withheld. Possibly they could be accompanied with a translator. It is important to keep in mind a lot of times we do not know if these translators are past recruiters or are safe people. Oftentimes they are working long hours, possibly not getting medical support. And typically these individuals are not being paid fairly or compensated for overtime work and weekend work.
depending on whether the recruiter is in home country, sometimes the recruiter will travel with the person and they arrive. Their passports are often held, their work permits are held, and it's the workers give them over freely because remember, the recruiter sold them a dream, and I have no reason not to trust everything they've said so far was happening. I was able to get on a plane. I landed at Pearson Airport. I'm now in Leamington, so I willingly hand over my documents because I knew this was happening. Some of the red flags or the warning signs will be the working really long hours, working, 16, 18 hours a day, only being fed once a day. There's a lot of control that happens on their movements. Like the bunkhouses, if someone is working on the farm and at the bunkhouse, they don't get to see community providers, and we as a community don't see them. So we don't know the physical shape that the workers look because there's often indicators of exhaustion, malnourishment, appropriate clothing for the season that we may say, what's going on here? But we don't see that because they're removed. I've had workers talk about a ledger. So when they arrived to Canada, they thought they would be making money, and all of a sudden it's, well, your airplane ticket was much more, your transportation back and forth to work, the food that we feed you, the laundry, and the list of bills just rack up. So even though I'm working and I'm apparently getting a paycheck, what I owe eats it up, so I'm left with nothing. And because of the selling of the dream and the hope that I can take care of my family, workers will often stay in the situation for a long time, hoping that they will catch up, they will pay off the debt, and then be able to take care of family back home.
Well, they need help. They need mental health support because being through those experience is very hard, and we know take time to heal those type of situations. I believe everybody should be aware of this situation that we don't think that happen, and if they see any signs, support the people who has been through those situations and give the information. Everybody, we can do that, I believe.
People are increasingly vulnerable. As we know, there is some effects to not having status here in Canada, and there is some lack of accessibility to medical care, housing, and all the social supports that citizens are provided.
Legal Assistance of Windsor has been working with labor trafficking survivors for many, many years. The client I'm thinking of was male, so labor trafficking is predominantly male and female, so it's not overly weighted female like some of the other trafficking types. This individual was living in a very, very poor area. He had no opportunity to find work and no opportunity to go to school. And so he was watching his family struggle to feed his siblings and himself. And someone that he knew from the hometown said, do you want to work in Canada? Do you want to come and you can take care of your family? So he was sold that dream. And there was, I think, 16 or 17 other men from his town all went together, and they wound up in Ontario, and they were picked up in the airport. They were fed a really nice meal and then said, call home and let your family know that you're safe. So they called home, said, this is great, everything is fine. And the trafficker said, let me hold your passport and your travel documents because you're going to be living with a bunch of other people and I want to make sure your documents are safe. So they hand over their documents, and then they were actually staying in the house with the traffickers. It was a very large, wealthy house, and they were told to go to the basement. And what they saw were mattresses on the floor. There's a bunch of men sitting at a table, and they were told, don't come up until the morning. And so this turned into what was sold a dream is now a nightmare, where they were working in the construction industry about 18 hours a day. They were fed one meal from the leftovers from upstairs, and they were not allowed to leave this home. They were allowed to walk upstairs and go smoke in the garage, and then they have to go back downstairs. This was the client who spoke about the ledger, that even though he was working, he was never being paid. There was threats of violence, right? I know where your family is. I know what town they live in. So if you aren't well enough to work today, I can send my uncle to check on your family. And so that threat would get me up and get me going. Or threats against other men in the basement. Say, Robin, if you're not feeling well enough to work or you're too tired, I'm going to hurt so-and-so, right? So the threats not only for family and home country, but threats of other workers in the home. And what happened was this worker ended up being, he did get quite sick. They were working long hours, not being fed. He ended up being loaned out to another construction company, and he was able to ask for help. It took him 3 times to be able to ask for help before this other owner believed him, because we don't want to believe it's happening. And so when this other owner of a business called the police, and then the Crown's attorney was involved, and so that's how they were able to escape. Some of the men chose to go home, some chose to stay here, and it was one of the largest cases in Ontario, and they were granted citizenship. One of them I see all the time at the river, but the trauma lingers, right? Addiction comes, mental health comes, and the shame of, is this my fault? How did I get tricked into this? Is a big one. I mean, men face a lot of pressures to be able to provide and to be strong, and when they're tricked and abused, it's very difficult.